The Memphis Grizzlies are smack dab in the middle of all the intrigue here on trade deadline eve. They've got two very good players with very large contracts that they would very much like to move off their roster, not to mention Chandler Parsons, who has a very big number and hasn't played with the team, hasn't been with the team for months now. David Cobb covers the Grizzlies for the Memphis Commercial Appeal, and he is with us now here on NBA TV. And David, it was fascinating reading, and it may have been you, apologies, who reported the scene in the locker room last night where Gasol's stuff was being gathered for a potential move. He didn't play last night against the Minnesota Timberwolves in anticipation he might be dealt, but for the moment he's still there. What are the chances he makes it through tomorrow as a Grizzly?
Well, I would say they're pretty slim because he's not with the team in Oklahoma City tonight, and of course they play in Oklahoma City tomorrow night, at which time the deadline will have passed. So the fact that he didn't make that trip tells me that there's a pretty good chance that he's going to get moved before the deadline. And
is it Charlotte most likely?
Yeah, that seems like the most likely suitor for Marc Gasol. And of course, the assumption was that a deal was imminent last night, and that's why Marc didn't play. But there's a hang-up of some sort between those two teams. Not sure exactly what it is right now, but it certainly seems like Charlotte is the front runner for Gasol.
David, this is David Griffin. I don't envy you at all right now. You're in a very tough position in terms of sorting through all of the rumor and what's really been offered and not offered. But in the Mike Conley situation, we've been led to believe to some degree that Ricky Rubio, Derek Favors, and a first has been offered for Mike Conley. Where do you think the offers stand now from Utah for Mike? And do you think Mike ends up being moved by that deadline?
Well, it's interesting with Utah because it seems like they're the team most doggedly pursuing Mike Conley pretty clearly. However, there's this narrative out there today, which is not something I've confirmed independently, but that others have reported on, which is that Conley would prefer to go to an Eastern Conference team. So that throws a wrinkle into it. And I think if you're the Grizzlies, the other part of that deal is you've got to do some advanced work to see if maybe you could flip Favors and Rubio for some draft picks, if that's the route you want to go down as you sort of go into full rebuild mode if you're trading Mike Conley. So a few factors at play there. Among those are Conley's desires and maybe the Grizzlies having to do some diligence to see what they could get if they were to flip the guys in a potential deal with the Jazz.
David, this is Tom Penn. I lived in Memphis for 7 years when the Grizzlies moved to the city. And I know full well what Marc Gasol means to that community. He was a 12-year-old when he came over with his brother Pau. And him and Conley both, just take us through a little bit of what the emotions around those two guys leaving with what they've meant to the city, the ascension of the Grizzlies. They're really the two guys that got them where they got them in terms of Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, absolutely. Those two, and you throw in Tony Allen and Zach Randolph and what that sort of core four meant to the Grizzlies. They're the group that entrenched the Memphis Grizzlies in that community, because until they started making consecutive playoff runs and appearances, the team had not been very successful. They were really struggling to gain a foothold as John Calipari had the Memphis Tigers playing at a high level. But behind Mike Conley and Marc Gasol, the Memphis Grizzlies made 7 straight playoff appearances, and they really sort of embedded the team into the soul of the city as they did that. And so that's why this is an emotional thing, both for the city and for them as individuals, to potentially be parting ways with the place, that they've spent their entire careers.
And Gasol and Conley might not be the only Grizzlies on the move before it's all said and done. What are the chances JaMychal Green, Garrett Temple, who's a veteran point guard who might be sought after by a lot of teams, make it through tomorrow's deadline as well?
I would think that the Grizzlies would absolutely need to move JaMychal Green and Garrett Temple, and I think probably the reason they've held on to him as long as they have is to make sure that those guys wouldn't be chips that they would need to make a deal for Conley or Gasol more attractive to another team. So if it comes down to it and they're not going to trade Conley, I still think that there's something to be gained from trading Garrett Temple and JaMychal Green and potentially Justin Holiday. And the last thing I'll say is that one thing I think people are discounting a little bit is how it might be attractive for the Grizzlies to keep Mike Conley in a way that's not being totally evaluated, and that if the Grizzlies finish outside of the top 8 in this year's draft, they convey a pick to the Boston Celtics that they owe them at some point in the next 3 years. So there is a little bit on the table for the Grizzlies that would make keeping Conley attractive for the sake of being competitive and conveying that pick to Boston this year.
That's a good point. Busy time for David Cobb of the Memphis Commercial Appeal. We appreciate you spending a few minutes with us.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
All right, guys, what do you think the tipping point was? You know, David mentioned Tony Allen and Zach Randolph. They moved on from them, what was it, a year and a half ago. Why did they wait this long to try to get beyond the Gasol Conley era, which pretty clearly had run its course in Memphis? And is there an argument to be made that maybe they should have done this a while back?
I think there was a little too much go-for-it mode back when they were good, and they forfeited the right to bring in these young kids. You have to keep the pipeline refreshed. San Antonio keeps their picks. There's a reason for that. Sustainable success requires the influx of good young talent, because good young talent gets better. And they're cheap, and they're eager. And you see that with Jaren Jackson now. This young kid there gives them new hope. He's had a nice rookie season, something to build around. And you need a constant pipeline of players to keep it going.
So one of the things we've heard that was a significant factor for them in their thought process and keeping that group together so much, and you were there, so it'd be interesting to get your take on this, the market factors of Memphis, that you have to remain highly competitive to keep their attention. Now that Penny Hardaway is at the University of Memphis and signed the #1 player in the recruiting class for next year, is there a threat that if they fall too far down in that market, they may never get it back?
I think they'll get it back. What they did was and this was actually after I left, the team found the identity that related to the city's identity, this grit and sort of this, it's us against the world, and the Tony Allen get after it defensively, and Zach Randolph showed up. And
the whole grit and grind persona.
The grit and grind persona just fit. So they could reinvent that. You know, that really identifies there. But that'll come down to what kind of talent they have and what kind of personalities they have. But it's been a nice run for them in Memphis, for sure.
Figures to be a busy 24 hours or so for the Memphis Grizzlies. It'll be interesting to see who moves, how many of them move. They can unload the Parsons contract. Part of the pipe dream in Memphis as well. It could happen. Stranger things have happened, right?